Okay, guys, now it's time to really start thinking about realistic fiction because our end in mind for this unit is to not only read a realistic fiction story, but we are also going to be creating a realistic fiction story. You have had a chance for the last few days to really do a deep dive into all the different components of realistic fiction. But I'd like to share with you a summary of some of those just for a second so we can all kind of just make sure we're all on the same page here, okay? So, one of the first things that we really need to ask ourselves is the realistic piece of realistic fiction. Look at this question up here on this anchor chart. How can I write a realistic fiction story that is realistic? Well, here's how. All of these are different components of a story, and underneath them are ways that in a specifically a realistic fiction story, we can make our stories feel realistic. So one of those things to think about is the problem and solution of a story. This is what gets us excited about reading, right? This is what creates the page turner. Is this problem going to be solved? In a realistic fiction story, guys, one realistic problem that could really happen to you in real life is a perfect way to make this fictional story that we're going to create realistic. Another way to do that is to think about the setting. In a realistic fiction story that's really realistic and it connects with readers, realistic descriptive settings are places that could be real. Sometimes in realistic fiction stories, we've learned that authors use real places and create fictional characters. Other times, authors use places that are inspired by real things, although they may have a made up name and not actually be a real location. But here's the key, they could be. Realistic fiction characters can be based on real people or could actually be real people. Remember, in realistic fiction stories, there are no goblins, there are no fairies, there's no magic, and there are no mythical creatures. That falls under the fantasy category, not realistic fiction, and we're doing realistic fiction. Remember, just like we had in our personal narrative, details are powerful. Even in a realistic fiction story, we want to show, not tell. We want to use strong feelings, dialogue, strong thinking, and strong actions. And all of these things are components of any good writing, and we're going to talk more about those later. But today, we are going to continue to brainstorm a fictional story of our own that can be realistic. And the way that you are going to do that is with this brainstorming sheet here that is attached to the below assignment. You are going to ask yourself, what kind of realistic fiction story could I create? And we're going to continue brainstorming for our own realistic fiction piece. What I want you to do today is think about if you could create a fiction story about anything, anything at all. Think of the components of that realistic fiction story that we just talked about and that we learned about the day before this lesson. And with that, combine it with your what? Oh, yeah, creativity to begin to answer these questions below. After you answer these questions below, save this document to your as your realistic fiction brainstorm document and attach it to this assignment. So you have 4 questions here that I want you to think about. If you could create a realistic fiction story about anything at all, where would your stories take place? What kind of realistic setting would you imagine? And why did you pick this? Who would your character or characters be? Why would you choose them? Remember, they need to be realistic and describe them a little bit for me here. Remember, these don't exist. You get to create these. You are the author of this moment, of this story. What could possibly happen in this story? Have you ever thought about a story that you've maybe always wanted to write about this certain problem or this certain, complication that a character would have to, try to figure out? Maybe you want to make a bulleted list of a few different problems here that you could maybe think about writing about. And then this last one is really helpful because good authors always use other authentic authors to inspire their own writing. So what realistic fiction stories do you have experience with that could be an inspiration for you? And think about some of the examples from the presentation yesterday. I know Harriet the Spy was a huge inspiration for me. The Swiss Family Robinson is now more of the historical fiction category, but even like the movie Spy Kids, even though there's like science fictiony stuff in it, the idea, or not Spy Kids, excuse me, Mim's Island. Even though there's more of an adventure component to it, the idea of living on an island and being a real kid and having to survive, that's a really big inspiration for me. So, my friends, in each of these sentences, I'm expecting full sentences unless you're creating a bullet point, and I'm expecting at least a paragraph for each one of these questions because I'm going to really push you to not only use the components of realistic fiction we've been talking about, but also your own creativity here. All right, let's get brainstorming.